Morena, good morning, committee. Just check everyone online. Can you hear me okay? Give us a wave. Cool, thank you. Silence.
Yes, can hear.
Thanks, Martin. Good morning, everyone. Elected members online, we've got Angela and Martin. Welcome. Before we get underway, I'm just going to hand over to Mangai James just to open up the karakia for us.
He kuku tuatahi māki ki tātua I runga rawa. Ko ia nei te timatanga, ko ia no te whakamutinga korore ki ngā wā katoa. Nā rangatira o te taumata, te pai tapu, te kōmiti a mātou, tēnei te mihi, koutou katoa, kia ora mai tātou. E noi tātou. E iwa ngā mano, tēnei te whakamuimiti atu ki a koe, mō tēnei huhunga a mātou te kōmiti, te mahiri a rohi, te kauni hera hoki. Arahina mai mātou, kia u ki te tika ki te pono, tuko mai tō waireo tapu, hei manaaki, hei arahi, hei te aki, I tō mātou mahi I tēnei ata. Huri no, tēnei mātou e tūho nei ki mua I tō aroaro, ka tuku tēnei hui I runga I tō ingoa tapu, ahu kau te hoki. Tō mātou kai whakaora. Amen. Kia ora mai.
All right, thanks, James. All right, everyone, just before we get into the meeting today, I have tried to preempt with the best of intentions to keep today as succinct as possible. This has been a journey over the last 18 months with a lot of dynamic input from central government and staff, notwithstanding any genuine questions or concerns, of course, but I don't want to elongate this just for the sake of it. So that's my intention, but I am in your hands. We'll kick off with apologies, if any. I have received one from Deputy Mayor. I'll move that those be accepted. Thanks, Sarah. Confirmation of agenda as before you on the run sheet. I'll move. Seconded. Thanks anyway, Maxine. Councillor Rob. Declaration of interest, if any. None. Public forum. None. Great, we're on to page 5 of our agenda, confirmation of previous minutes. Would you like to move, Councillor Angela? Thank you. Councillor Rob, second. Those in favour? Any against? Carried. Awesome. Okay, on to Chair's report. Look, I'll take as read. It's just really, firstly, an acknowledgement of the work Luke did. Obviously had an impact on all of us at different times in different ways. I just thought it's an appropriate time to acknowledge him as we wrap up this triennium. But equally, I just wanted to acknowledge his successor, Dr. Mark Davey, who's come in and carried on that work and gripped up where we are as a council and a community, and also guided us through that as well. So I just want to acknowledge those things. I'm also really proud, actually, of the work that this council has done. Was something like 5 Tier 1 metros wrapped up in what was quite a rushed bipartisan bill. And I think our response is pretty special, actually. It's robust, it's sensitive to our communities, and it has a lot of pretty good things in it, as you can see, and as we'll talk through a bit further today. So also thanks to Councillor Angela just for her support and trust with me in this role, and I think we're about to release something subject to the end of today that we can all be proud of, and less talking. That's me. So happy to take any questions. Otherwise, I'll move. Seconded by Councillor Rob. Angela, you question?
No debate. No question, debate.
Where you go.
Yeah, look, I just wanted to thank you, Councillor Hamilton. You have done a great job, and I'm humbled by the shout out in your chair's report. You know I haven't done a lot past being a committee member because, you know, you had this in hand, and I was there if you need, or if you needed, but you didn't. It was certainly the easiest deputy chair role that I've ever had. You have been in the driver's seat with a terrific team around you, and you've led the process really well. Look, I agree with your comments in your report and our concerns starting out of this process with the government's one-size-fits-all approach. We know that that doesn't work for Hamilton, and the team have done a tremendous job as much as they can in pushing back on that. So I certainly hope that the baby that you mentioned isn't thrown out with the bathwater once we hand this over to the commissioners, and I know that's part of the report, in the face of really tough legislation. So well done, Ryan. I had no doubt that you would lead this really well. And I've looked back on my notes. I keep committee notes on everything and just high-level brief stuff. And I note on the first meeting that we had, sometimes I write comments to myself, and I wrote in there, Jesus, excuse my language, but Jesus looks great. And he is, and he was, and it's nice that you've recognised that as well in your report. So well done. Thank you.
Thanks, Angela. Just welcome Mayor Paula in Zoom there. Is there any other debate? It's been moved and seconded, so we'll go to the vote.
Yes, sir, I do have I have a hand up.
Oh, sorry, Martin.
Yeah, look, for some reason, when you talked about brevity of the meeting today, I didn't realise you'd contacted all the members. I thought that was just targeted to me personally. So I'm sort of kind of moved and heartened that you weren't just focusing on me for some reason. I can't think why you would focus on me on that one about brevity. But I just very quickly just want to again shout out in terms of your tribute to the late Luca Dwyer, who obviously had an incredible footprint, and Dr. Mark and the team are carrying that on. But I just want to very quickly join Angela in complimenting you as a chair. And without wanting to embarrass you, you have demonstrated incredible work, intellect, focus, and you've always kept your ego parked in the top drawer. I don't know even if you have an ego, but I just want to say you're been a role model, and I think, you know, to get things done, I mean, I think, you know, whatever the outcome, I think there's been a heap of work, and I want to acknowledge you and your team and the staff. Thank you.
Thanks, Martin. You can actually talk longer if you want, if you're going to talk like that. Mayor Paula.
Good morning, everyone. I've got a little bit of cold, so I'm going to not sneeze on you. Just in support of the words that have already been spoken, yeah, I do want to thank you and the District Plan Committee altogether for the work that you've done, because this is crucial work. It's really, really important. It sets us up for success as a city in the ways that we develop. And it's complex stuff. It's not the sort of stuff that the general public necessarily gets involved in until the district plan rules try and on the way of their lives. And there have been a few incidences in the district plan that, as we'll be talking about later, that have been quite, you know, lumpy and hard to go through. So thank you very much for your leadership through this. Stick around, we might make you finish the job next year. So yeah, thanks Ryan.
Thanks, Mayor Paula. I'm not sure who moved it, but I haven't spoken yet. Just also to add to Blair and the team, you know, there's so many people involved in this team from the different departments, and Plan Change 9, obviously, and Plan Change 12 now, and all the other plan changes coming. And to Lachlan for his role in guiding us with, you know, Te Ture Whaimana and the qualifying matter, and that was a really special thing to obviously leverage a lot of this off. So just acknowledge anyone that I don't recognise personally, Blair, to the team. Just please, you know, encapsulate. It's a massive across organisation and out of organisation effort. Cool. We'll go to the vote. Is there any against? None. Carried unanimously. Thank you. Item 7, Plan Change 12.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and councillors. Just to start off, just in terms of administration housekeeping, there are a few late changes to the report, so I just want to note those or acknowledge those in terms of just adjusting some numbers under the financial contributions section of the report and just adding some further clarity at paragraphs 57 and 58 in terms of defining what it means to be inside and outside of the overlay. But I'll hand over to Paul Bowman to speak to the report. But yeah, equally just want to acknowledge the leadership of this committee and thank them on this journey, and also the team. The team's done an incredible job, and the package of work's very impressive to a high standard in a short space of time. So thanks.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to acknowledge the Chair's leadership in what's been quite a turbulent year, 18 months, and also actually quite impressed with the Chair's report. You managed to condense 25 pages into 2 pages, and starting to question myself whether we needed 27 pages to sum up 18 months' work.
I may have had some help. I'll just put that out there.
Yeah. Look, it is quite a large report, and I appreciate it's a lot to get around. I think because this is the first public forum, what's been a long journey, it's important to lay out how we got to where we've got to. But falling short of saying I take the report as read, there will be some questions, no doubt, from elected members. So I'm happy to really go straight into those questions around whether it's on residential zoning or the overlay, just to get on with it. I don't want to read through the report verbatim. I think it sets it out. A lot of the report does actually summarise the last 2 district plan meetings. So what the infrastructure capacity overlay is about, what it means to be in and outside. Appreciate that's not always clear, so we can answer questions on that. The report also summarises our approach to other centres and where we're proposing medium density in some locations. The key thing in this report that you wouldn't have seen is also financial contributions. So under the Act, we had the ability to review our financial contributions policy, and I might say a very short space of time, but the wider team have come up with a proposal to go out for notification. So that's also to look at how we collect FCs without what they call double dipping with our DC policy, and that allows us to look at contributions to support what we're saying is required to give effect to Tui Whaimana, and also the other 2 strands of streetscape amenity improvements and obviously renewal, a component of recouping some renewal funding for local network upgrades. So I'll leave it there and happy to answer questions on the report that members have in front of them. I've also printed off some extra large maps for those slightly short-sighted and can't see A4, so feel free to look at those too.
Thanks, Mark and Paul. Just before I go to Mayor Paula, could one of you just talk through the recommendations, essentially, which we'll be voting on?
Yeah. So effectively, the purpose of this report really is to seek final resolution from this district plan committee to take the final recommendation for notification of Plan Change 12 to full council on the 18th of this month, so not too far away. Also to seek recommendation and confirmation of the financial contributions policy, which, as I said earlier, is probably the only thing that hasn't been before the District Plan Committee in the last 18 months. The independent hearings panel's already been approved and set up, so the recommendation just flags those people on that panel. There will be some familiar names there in the chair, David Hill, and really that's it. Receive the report and approve it to go to full council on the 18th of this month for formal notification the day after.
Fantastic, thank you.
Thanks.
Mia Paula. Oh, you're on mute.
Thank you. I'm really happy with that explanation. Just one, and the overlay seems reasonably clear to me, but there's a process, isn't there, for people challenging aspects of that still to go through?
Yes.
Through,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah.
So this is basically a document that would develop the community for them to raise issues or matters through the hearings, etc., and then the nuances will occur at that point. Yes.
Yes, this is really the first step of kind of a two-phase process, Mayor Paula. So, as you said, rightly said, submissions process commences on the 19th of August after should council approve it on the 18th, hopefully they do. And then there's 30-day period to the end of September for the public to make submissions on what's before them. And that's the plan change in its entirety. Much like right now, Plan Change 9's out for the community for submissions.
Yeah. And so on that, at the moment, does it have effect, or is it operative until it's decided upon, or has no? A lot of these things, sometimes plans have effect until they're heard.
Yeah, the like Plan Change 9, Plan Change 12, upon notification, will have what they term legal effect. So the provisions that are proposed will have legal effect upon notification.
Yeah, and that will last until the final determination, right?
That's correct, until commissioners make their recommendation and council accept or, consider the recommendation of commissioners, which will probably be around, don't quote me exactly, but June, July next year, 23.
So people are caught by this for at least a year, almost a year, not quite, almost a year. Just one of the things that has been exciting the public, has been distressing some of the public actually, is the heritage. So they're caught by that too, aren't they? That the fact that that's in effect now, and there is a process like this that people who have concerns about heritage would have through this process.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, Mayor Paula. So Plan Change 12 isn't directly addressing heritage. That is under Plan Change 9, as you know, which is out for consultation at the moment. The two do run alongside each other in terms of process, but they are two distinct plan changes. So today, Plan Change 12 in this report is really addressing our response to the government's requirement to intensify. And that's what it is. We are required to notify this by the 20th of August this year, along with all other Tier 1 councils. So there's a legal requirement. Hence the importance of today and the importance of the 18th of August to meet our statutory requirements in that respect.
Sorry, you're on mute again, Mayor Paula.
Sorry, that's because I was coughing. I think you accept that. I think there's a lot of anxiety out in the public not understanding where all the things fit. And the reason I raised it here is there is in Chapter 19 a reference to it, and people will read that and be concerned. I've had people ringing me up in tears, of course, and very distressed about the whole, what does it mean? I just make that point.
So again, through you, Mr. Chair, Mayor Paula, we have run a fair bit of consultation and sort of engagement already with the communities. And specifically in terms of Plan Change 12, we'll be sending out notification to all of the city, in effect, 50,000 odd letters at the time of notification, so subject to resolutions of this committee and full council on the 18th. Those letters to 50,000 households will go out on the 19th of August. And we will have a public consultation window of 30 working days. So we've extended it beyond the minimum statutory requirement of 20 working days to 30 to provide that opportunity for public to be heard. Remembering though that this is a requirement of government on all councils. So we are doing what we are being legally effectively instructed to do, but we are trying to provide as much opportunity for engagement and feedback as possible.
Okay.
Thank you. Councillor Robb.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just before I start, I had some surgery on my mouth yesterday, so if my questions and debate are more garbled than usual today, please forgive me. Than usual, yeah. Look, I'm just a little bit confused. Plan 9 has gone out for consultation. It's not clear in the staff recommendation here that Plan 12 is doing the same. That on one hand we're saying that we're approving public notification, but then C goes on to say that we have an independent hearings panel already appointed. Can you just guide me around whether there is a public consultation first on Plan 12?
There we go. Yeah, I mean, it's not naturally easily accessible, I think, the interplay between Plan Change 9 and 12. So I'll try and just explain it, and hopefully, so Plan Change 9 is predominantly around, through a Schedule 1 process, the identification and its spatial extent of what we call qualifying matters. So that's historic heritage areas, significant natural areas in terms of, our, for example, our gully networks, our built heritage, individual buildings, and our archaeological sites, to name some of them. So that plan change is kind of ring-fenced in terms of the identification and the methodology used to identify these areas as qualifying matters. That's a separate, what we call Schedule 1 process, a normal plan change, if you like, not the IPI that the government have asked us to do. That was notified, I think, just over a week ago. So submissions, we're in a submission process.
Yep.
And if you're affected by that, whether you own a heritage building or you don't, or you do now, or you're in a heritage area, submissions have gone out. Now, Plan Change 12 has to have one eye to what's going on that process, because Plan Change 12 will be the mechanism to respond to those heritage areas that are identified. So commissioners, first of all, have to see whether the methodology and the area is acceptable. Plan Change 12 then responds in terms of heights and densities and site coverage. So we're allowed to modify the government's rules if it's a identified heritage area or significant natural area. So what will happen is Plan Change 9 will tend to get heard first, thankfully by the same commissioners, and they will consider Plan Change 9. Some people want to be in a heritage area, others will probably want to be outside it, for example, and then Plan Change 12 comes in and looks at all the zoning in the city, including those areas identified through Plan Change 9, and it changes the provisions to reflect those qualifying matter areas.
Okay.
So the reason why 9 has gone first through a Schedule 1 process is because there's rights of appeal on that. So council have made a decision that, you know, if you're in or out a heritage area, for example, there should be a right of appeal to debate that.
So do the public, as far as Plan Change 12 are concerned, do the public have the public, not developers and those who have a committed interest in the district plan, does the public have a role to play and an opportunity to submit on Plan Change 12?
Yep, they do, Councillor Robb. They effectively have two bites of the cherry. So through Plan Change 9, they can submit on whether they wish to be in or outside a qualifying matter area,
Yep.
whether they disagree or agree with the methodology used to identify those areas. And then through Plan Change 12, they can also submit on the council's approach to dealing with those qualifying matters. So by that,
Okay.
the heights and densities.
Okay. So what happens on the journey, you know, if we're going to consultation and then it goes next to a panel, and I know that having been involved in the last district plan at the latter stages when we had objections to that plan. That was the time that I came onto council. We were at that stage. What happens now in the next kind of 12 to 18 months between these submissions and the panel, insofar as changes that submitters might give to us that we hadn't thought of or that we thought were good and not included in there, and or the panel in terms of what recommendations they might make given their experience in other areas to make changes to the plan that we're seeking to submit to the public now, and this is all prior to the point at where we get formal, what do we call them, formal objections to which I think is another stage, isn't it?
That's right.
Another stage after the panel have decided. There's another stage for objections, formal objections to the plan.
Councillor, really good question. So, and let's just be really clear. So Plan Change 12 is following what's called an IPI or ISPP streamlined planning process, which is specifically set up to bring in the intensification rules in a fast-track manner. And there are no appeal rights on Plan Change 12 as a result of that IPI process. The hearings panel, unlike Schedule 1 process and unlike Plan Change 9, they do not have decision-making authority. They will make recommendations on decisions back to council, and that's the sort of mid-next year we're expecting that, all being well. Council will then decide on those recommendations. For those recommendations which council accept, they will then become operative. For those which council choose to reject, the minister will come in and make a final determination on those. So the process is somewhat truncated. There are no appeals to the Environment Court. The only pathway is through judicial review in the High Court if somebody's not happy. But that comes down to a matter of process as opposed to a matter of planning judgment, if you will.
So this is different to the existing district plan where we sat down, if you like, with a blank piece of paper.
Correct.
The council did back in 2008 or whenever it was.
Correct.
And could actually develop a district plan. This one has some fixed rules in it set by central government.
Indeed. That
we are unable to change, or if we try to tweak them, then there's a potential for a challenge from the minister if the minister feels that the tweaking is not.
The minister's opportunity to become involved in the process is only triggered if this council chooses to reject the recommendations from the independent hearing panel, say mid to late next year when those come back to this council. So that's the point at which the minister would become involved. And if not, and if this council does choose to accept all the recommendations from the independent hearing panel, the changes become operative, and that becomes the new district plan.
Okay.
Yeah, and I would just add, and picking up on Paul's point, and it's a really important distinction to make. We've made the conscious decision to take heritage areas, SNAs, etc., through Plan Change 9. Which is the more traditional Schedule 1 process, which does provide for appeal rights and the like. So we're giving as much opportunity to the public, to owners, to have their say in that process. And if I just wrap that up, one final point is the ability to alter the government's directives through the Enabling Housing Act and what we see here in Plan Change 12 is effectively constrained to these things called qualifying matters. So that is the single biggest lever to alter the density standards, to alter what the government is directing us to do.
Okay.
So hopefully that clarifies things.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
It's as plain as, it's as,
Well,
clear as
yeah,
mud.
well, yeah,
in some
exactly, yeah,
areas.
yeah.
Okay.
I'm just wondering, just to add to that, Mark, it might be just worth mentioning that the role of the government agencies who you've obviously had some pre-engagement with and will probably take a very active role through the submission process as well.
Yeah, it's a really good point, and we've spoken about it in previous committees. So the likes of Kāinga Ora, possibly Ministry of Housing and Urban Development and Ministry for the Environment will have a very keen interest in this, effectively from in my words, a compliance point of view, to ensure that Hamilton City is complying with the legislation and implementing it as they wish it to be implemented.
Do you think that they, in terms of discussions that you might have already had with them, do you think that they are of a mind that they might interpret government's directive exactly as the government have directed, or would they specifically look at what is unique and different about Hamilton, say compared with other tier one cities?
So yes, Councillor, we've been having conversations with them, and yes, we've been explaining to them the unique circumstances and the implications of Te Ture Whaimana as a qualifying matter. The legal opinion and advice in terms of how to interpret it has been shared through Future Proof and has been shared through those government agency departments. We are different, so there's a little bit of, I suppose, education or understanding required there. Clearly, we need to balance housing intensification with our obligations around River First, effectively, or betterment for the hour. Some of those government agencies will take a more black and white view, right, in terms of just enabling housing and interpreting the legislation, in a very sort of black and white manner.
Right, okay. All right, and one last question, Chair, if I may, on something that's a little different, and that's on paragraphs 146 to 148 on the financial aspects. Given that the funding for the district plan review is coming from a targeted rate, and my understanding from the finance team that they have got full accounting over what's being spent, I'm just asking if in future reports we can have a running balance of what is being spent in this area so that we have a degree of transparency over the amount we're collecting and the targeted rate for this district plan review, which I believe we originally estimated at about $14 million. And given that this is likely to run over 3 trienniums, I guess, that we kind of have a bit of a running total as to what the costs have been, just so that our ratepayers see that how we're spending their targeted rate, and we also have the same degree of accountability.
Yeah, we can certainly look at that, Chair Rob, and I just would note in the General Manager's report we do give a quantum total of the spend for the year to June, so that's covered in the GM report and the district plan program.
Okay, I must have missed that one.
So that covers, because of course when the LTP was set, you might recall it was originally proposed as $14 million, then Council reduced it to $12 million.
Yeah, that's, sorry,
And so there was a number of changes made through there. The makeup of the program has changed quite dramatically since that time, but happy to further augment that reporting in future reports.
Yep, thank you. Thank you, Chair. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Rob. I think with the surgery, you're actually speaking more eloquently. So well done. Mangai James.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kia ora kōrua. I guess as just a position for myself when I ask these questions is I won't be able to see the report going to Council. So my questions is probably into the bit more of the detail elements of it, just to, I guess, if you bear with me as I explore some of the stuff. And I guess one of the starting ones, if I can, is around the given effect to Te Ture Whaimana. And I guess my starting point has always been it's a holistic approach. And looking at the financial contribution activities in which the things are going to, the spend going to, very much from an environmental values context. And I guess I'm trying to see where the connection is to the cultural values and cultural interest that sits within Te Ture Whaimana. And in part where it sits with the current plan change 9 that sits there's current. And, that's going through a Schedule 1 process, whether people accept it being in or not. And then this part here where, as te ture whaimana, as a qualifying matter across the board, I guess I'm trying to find the connection back to that financial contribution towards the interest of mana whenua, I guess, in that context. And even more so, you got education initiatives. Where does mātauranga Māori fit in the context of understanding how it fits both in council and outside council in our decision making? I guess that's the first question.
Kia ora, James, thank you. Very good question. So the financial contributions, we're confined to using that instrument to offset the adverse effects of development. In this case, the adverse effects of residential intensification is with respect primarily to three waters and our discharges, whether it be stormwater, wastewater or otherwise, to the awa. So that brings us to use the FC lever or instrument to offset those effects. And doing that through, we've talked about gully rehabilitation, we've talked about streetscape amenity and things like that. In terms of the engagement, and that speaks, I suppose, as well to the engagement with Te Ture Whaimana as a qualifying matter as well. Yes, it's got 13 objectives, and yes, it takes a broader, more holistic view than just the biophysical environment. But again, in this instance, in the context of housing intensification, the issue that's being caused, or where we are, I guess, coming into conflict with Te Ture Whaimana is in terms of the health and well-being of the river.
Okay. Because I guess, and I don't disagree with anything you said there, Mark. So I agree with that part. I guess I was trying to say it again that there's, at the birth of Te Ture Whaimana comes from a very much we're part of the river kind of complex. Not the, and I'm not trying to take away that what you're doing is not that. I guess it's in the detailed application now of this rule, and the wording in itself is given effect to Te Ture Whaimana, not to Te Ture Whaimana Objective D. So I guess what I'm asking is, in that kind of all of Te Ture Whaimana, I guess in the 32 evaluation or whatever detail you end up explaining as part of the package, does it get into that level of detail of saying all of Te Ture Whaimana or just objectives?
It's a very good distinction, yeah, and look, we can go back and clarify that, because you're right, it's not covering all 13 objectives, it is covering part of it where we are entering into that kind of tension or that conflict with it, with the plan change, so you're right, yeah.
Okay, and so I guess, by means, I'll be interested in what the further detail looks like as the full package goes to the council in the 18th August meeting. Again, I have no role in that part, but I guess I was just trying to explore that as we get into the details, and that there is an offering that we're given effect, or how we're responding to giving effect to Te Ture Whaimana through financial contributions, and that's what the developer's offering back to the catchment, I guess.
Yeah, it's not finite. It's not the start and finish of it. I suppose it's one component is how I would sort of describe it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we're sort of happy with that?
I think we're operating within an envelope in terms of the intensification, in terms of what we're being directed to do. So I think in the context of what we can do within this plan change, we are going as far as I think we possibly can. Yes.
Okay, copy.
That's not to say we couldn't be going further in other future plan changes or in other activities that council engages in. Yeah.
If I can explore that one part where you say education initiatives, is there an example you might have to share what that could be?
Yep, I think we need to reflect the cultural origins of Kirikiriroa, and I think there's a need through housing intensification to be acknowledging some of those historical connections. And so education is a broad bucket that I would imagine we would, as we go through and further work up this, we'd be looking at those types of things.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I guess apologies if I'm getting too much into the details, everyone. And so, recognising that we're talking about the health and well-being of the river, and we're using Te Ture Whai Mana as the qualifying matter, I guess it's that nuance with MPS freshwater around Te Mano Te Wai. And obviously, again, I'm looking at it from the 6 principles of mana whakahaere, kaitiakitanga, care of the river, and the likes. How does that fit within the gambit of all of these initiatives that are coming through as the financial contributions?
I couldn't really answer that. I mean, this is pretty focused on residential intensification because that's what we're being directed to do, and that kind of causal nexus between urban intensification and the kind of direct adverse effects of that. So
it's a fair point. I guess it's that with the activities you identified and given effect to Te Ture Whai Mana are activities about the restoration or the enhancement of gully waterways, riparian plantings and the like. So there is an element of Te Mano Te Wai that sort of sits in the reasons why you identified those activities. So again, where I'm trying to get to is there an opportunity, maybe is the best way to frame it, for the application of MPS freshwater in those Te Mano Te Wai within those activities you've identified?
Yep, we can certainly look at that. Yep.
Cool. And I guess in terms of the residential zoning side of things, because I've always had an interest in our plan around the opportunities for papakainga. And with the residential zone saying general residential, you can build to 3 stories, if I remember right, permitted activities and potential financial contributions related to that. And then I guess, has that been considered as part of the scenarios if there is papakainga development proposed to this council?
Morning, James. I mean, just to go to the other point as well, I think where you're heading is, are we not giving full effect to Te Ture Whai Mana by limiting what we're asking for through financial contributions? And I think the team have been very careful to say we're not just limiting it to riparian planting or access to the river. We've been, we're not giving lip service to it. I think we need to make sure it covers, as you say, the cultural narrative, the wider, all objectives of Te Ture Whai Mana. So in our wording, we're not just saying it's only this aspect, because you're diluting it, really. I think that's where you're, in terms of papakainga housing, the plan already enables that, the current operative plan. We've looked at the definition to align it. So in our medium and high density zones, what we're effectively saying in terms of lifting intensification for standard duplexes, the definition on papakainga will reflect that level of intensification we expect to see. So we're not limiting it to just standalone typologies, day-to-day duplexes or apartments. Papakainga is front and foremost in those plan provisions as well.
Yep, and I'm sorry for cutting you off, and I get that part. I guess now with these new rules coming in, they'll be subject to financial contributions.
Yes.
So it was, an activity restricted discretionary, I guess.
Yeah. And
now it's still a restricted discretionary, but now you're you're part of capturing the financial contributions.
That's correct. Currently, as the plan's written, there'd be no exclusion for papakainga housing. Yeah.
Yeah. So if they did do more than 1 unit on their property, that additional unit will be captured by the financial contribution you've just talked about.
Yep.
Okay. So I apologize. I'm just trying to explore the detail because I haven't seen everything yet. And the last one was, I got heaps more, but I'll just stick it to one more. Was just to understand, because I was a nuance I wasn't aware of, was non-compliant activity for a single-story dwelling in the high-density zone. Is that correct? How I read that?
Yes, it is. It's quite a. It's a really good question, because one of the challenges the team have had is, if you have a high density zone, how do you seek to encourage high density in a high density zone? Because if somebody comes along and builds a typical standard single story dwelling, you've really taken away a lot of that potential housing land supply and capacity that that zone's trying to encourage. So some of the levers are around the typologies in the plan, and we're trying to encourage apartments and townhouses. So much like in the central city right now, a standalone dwelling, residential dwelling, is non-complying activity. So we've pushed out that approach into the high density zone too, just to try and discourage a low density outcome where we're really trying to get the biggest bang for our buck in terms of return for investment infrastructure.
Yeah. And I can appreciate that approach. I guess it was, you know, in the time frame of 10 years kind of stuff. I can appreciate that. I guess I was trying to figure out if somebody was just wanting to do a dependent persons or an auxiliary kind of dwelling on that property. So it's not, you know, so they're just trying to get another house for, whether it's to take care of family or somebody, and they're in their zone. Will they be captured as a non-complying?
In terms of an ancillary, I think ancillaries wouldn't be. It's a redevelopment of a standalone dwelling.
Okay, cool.
But I will have to check and I'll get back to you because I'm not 100% certain.
Okay.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Mangwai James. There's probably some good stuff that could be socialised offline just to help further give you some comfort around some of that stuff, some good questions. Councillor Martin.
Yeah, I'll try and focus on a question and save the long speech, which I need more than 3 minutes later. I thought, well, actually a very good article, good summary. You yourself, as our city planner, were quoted that there's a risk of poor quality urban design outcomes. I'd have thought you'd have said much more poor quality urban design outcomes, but that's for debate in terms of some things, and, you know, collectively, I'm talking about, you know, a journey of where we could improve. And then this is the crucial sentence: the ability to make the new normal or the new urban environment attractive is being eroded from Tier 1 metro councils such as Hamilton. So if I can just go back to the chart on page 33, and just following up on Rob's question. So we prepare plan change 12, notification, submissions, further submissions. Council appoints independent hearings panels and they conduct hearings, so that's the normal. And then the panel makes recommendation and council considers the recommendations. So in that bit, and I'm thinking of next year, you know, the balance of what I call the political lens, you know, there's a political, you know, what do we want to see in Hamilton within the new confines of the legislation as it may be at that time. And if council says, no, look, we don't like those recommendations, then obviously the ones we like, we automatically adopt operative, boom. But the ones where they want to sort of even say that we're still uncomfortable with what the commissioners have recommended to us, even though that the commissioners may have said, well, actually, that's the legislation of the land and there's little we can do, but we want to push back, all right, for our community, because we are of the view that Wellington, one size doesn't fit all, and we in Hamilton know a lot more about our community than people in Wellington. In the end, still the Minister of the Environment makes a decision, but I'm just wondering, can you just focus a wee bit on just how much leeway we have to push back? Now that may in the end come down to a campaign of political change or not, I don't know. Do you see where I'm trying to come from? So rather than roll over and say, look, I'm sorry, that's what the legislation says, as against vigorously saying, no, the legislation in this situation is crap, and this is bad for our community, this bit.
Thanks, Councillor. Look, once it's notified, the position for council or councillors to change or alter the outcome is very limited. When those recommendations come back from the independent hearing panel, say mid to late next year, the decision on council is binary. It's either accept or reject. Those which you choose to reject, it doesn't mean you can start to modify them. It simply means it goes to the minister to make a determination. So that's why we've been working very closely with this committee over the last 6 months to come up with a solution that fits within the legal framework and that meets some of the desires of this committee, not all, given the tight confines of the legislation and what we're being directed to do, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I want to absolutely acknowledge Chair Ryan and you collectively, your work to operate within what I think, is confining situation. So absolutely get that. But next year is 2023. I think there's a democratic election at the end of that year, is my understanding. And I'm just trying to work out the balance between, obviously rollover, goes to the Minister of Environment and he or she can make the final decision, as against the ongoing targeted dialogue we need. And, I've had a discussion with yourself and Chair Ryan about targeting even our political candidates next year, because no bit of legislation is set in stone, and Parliament always has the opportunity to tweak things, all right? Our argument is we want more flexibility. So I guess what I'm looking at is, if you like, a two-pronged approach where we have to obey the letter of the law, but parallel with that, if it's obvious that there are some consequences that the new council next year is seeing as not working for us, how we can maintain, if you like, that parallel pressure. Do you see what I'm getting at? And I respect there's a due process, but I also know that we're in a political environment and legislation can change.
So the question, sorry, Mark?
Yeah, well, that's all right. That's an attempt at a question.
Yeah. So through you, Mr. Chair, Councillor, I mean, look, I'll leave the politicking to you. We've come up with a solution which we think fits within the legal framework, or in our view, it does fit within the legal framework. And I guess dances this tightrope between providing greater intensification whilst meeting some of our core obligations, such as Te Ture Whaimana. On your point with respect to urban design, yes, the ability to influence urban design for 3 or less dwellings has been eroded, but we are significantly bolstering the urban design criteria and assessment sort of steps 4 or more dwellings across the city beyond, so strengthening what we have at the moment quite significantly. And I don't know if Paul Bowman wants to speak to that further.
I think the next question I then have, we in our correspondence with residents, are we clearly going to delineate what we are trying to do as against Wellington forcing stuff on us? And bearing in mind this is both National and Labor have agreed with this legislation. My intel is telling me that maybe the Nats might start to reflect, and I'm sure the government will be sensitive also. So I'm just trying to work out that so people are crystal clear, this is not this wretched council doing X, this is the council doing X in the context of a new law change.
Well, yes, Councillor. I mean, our communication refers pretty explicitly to the Enabling Housing Supply Act and the directives that are being placed on us by central government to bring about this plan change to further intensification across the city. And you'll see in those comms which you're quoting as part of our strategy to make it very clear that this is not something that's being led by HCC. It is something that we're having to comply with from central government.
And is there a strategy, just confirm there's going to be a strategy to wheel in all the political party candidates next year so that they individually have a really good micro-understanding of what's working and what we think's not? Because obviously we want them to take that message back.
Yes, we've already had briefings with local MPs in terms of Plan Change 12, given its significance to their constituents. So, yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
Can I just add to that, Councillor Martin? We have met with all the major parties who have interest in this. So it's not just the government, the opposition, and a selection of the different opposition parties. So we've had a good comprehensive conversation with those MPs. I would also just add that the role of the independent commissioners is critical as this next stage commences. And Council has previously selected those commissioners for Plan Change 12. And you'll recall in the report when we recommended them the skill sets that they each brought to the table, and our, I guess, the focus of Mark and the team to recommend to council commissioners who we believed had the appropriate broad skill sets that reflected the circumstances that we felt Hamilton was going to be focused on in terms of our plan change. So again, the commissioners and the need to get the appropriately skilled and experienced commissioners was a critically important focus for us. So we feel that we have a good broad mix there to reflect the types of matters that will be the subject of great interest.
And I think what you're saying, that's beyond a dispute. What I'm thinking of the new council next year is obviously through the summary of the submissions, you have individual submissions, but just getting for the new council to have a very clear understanding of where the community kind of sits, their fears, hopes, dreams, and how you run a parallel political process as against you trying to do your best that you can within legislation.
Yeah. Good question.
It's a sort of, yeah, I've answered it, but yeah. Anyway, I'll save that for debate.
Thank you, Councillor Sarah.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Mark and Paul. I've got just a few questions. The first one is, what is the overall impact on housing and business supply looking at these zoning changes?
Good question. I guess it depends on what we're looking at. So there's a minimal impact in terms of our historic heritage areas. They're really only potentially reducing our model capacity by 2 to 3%. If you look at where those historic heritage areas are being proposed through Plan Change 9. I don't have the exact figures, but I think going to some of the narrative in the last few committees and what you're seeing is the messaging the comms team have put out over the last several months is we were already in quite a good space in terms of meeting our requirements under our housing and business assessment through the NPSUD. So our existing operative plan, because of our duplex provisions already in exist, were already going a long way to meeting our housing supply numbers. So what we're doing here is going above and beyond what we currently need to meet. So the government have deliberately come in and said, we really want you to lift your capacity even further than what you're currently meeting, which is why it's been a significant challenge for the organisation for a number of reasons, not least to sort of manage the infrastructure component. Even with the restrictions in place, we're still meeting potentially a third more than we need to meet in terms of where the government's rules meet. So if you think that if we weren't doing a moderated response, this would be what the government's requiring us to do. We're only a third less than what the government is seeking through managing our overlay approach. So we're actually still providing a significant amount of housing land supply through the zoning proposed in Plan Change 12, and that's through not only stage 1, but also the medium density and the walkable catchment. That's assuming there's a certain level of take-up and all the houses get built, of course, but we're still meeting our requirements under the housing and business assessment. So the team are very confident that even with our qualifying matters through Plan Change 9 and our approach through Plan Change 12, we're meeting our sufficient housing land supply numbers through our HBA.
And is it possible to provide kind of even like a graphic or like some kind of indication then of where we are right now with our current district plan and then where this is taking us, with a comparative?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think we can. I've got my colleague in the wings, Mr. Keith Hornby, who might be able to help in that respect. But as part of our evidence, when we notify, we do need to demonstrate what these qualifying matters mean. So we do have material that's part of the whole suite of Plan Change 12 provisions. But I'll pass over to Keith to elaborate a bit further, if I can.
Yes, so I didn't catch all of what Paul said, but
what is the impact overall on housing and business capacity with these proposed changes?
Yes, so what we have done is we've remodelled the impact on capacity that both Plan Change 12 as proposed would create in addition to our operative district plan baseline. So we have a view, an established view on the extent to which our operative district plan enables capacity for housing. So that's our baseline. And that was the baseline that was done through the Housing and Business Capacity Assessment as at June last year. We've then modelled what an unconstrained application of the MDRS and the Policy 3 provisions would enable, and then applied the qualifying matters to determine the extent to which that capacity that would otherwise have been theoretically enabled by the full and unfettered application of the MDRS provisions would be. So we understand we've been able to quantify the difference between those two levels. So yeah, as Paul noted, the qualifying matters in Plan Change 9, there's only a couple of them which impact on development capacity, and it's very minor, like the changes to the historic heritage areas. And yeah, as Paul noted, those are only 1 or 2%. The application of Te Ture Whai Mana is larger, and that's reduces that theoretical capacity by about, just off the top of my head, about 15% or so. So altogether, the collective impact of the constraints which are imposed through Plan Change 12, we're looking at roughly a third reduction from what would otherwise be enabled.
Yeah.
So Plan Change 12 is still delivering significant capacity over and above what our current operative district plan enables. And just to note that a lot of that capacity is enabled in our city centre, our walkable catchment, and in our and to the area north of the city, and in our areas where of general residential or other areas of the city where the overlay does apply. Within that, we still have the areas of medium density have been enlarged, or what was previously our residential intensification zones. So whilst there is that dampener on the capacity that would otherwise occur through the full application of the MDRS,
Through the
there is still a
infrastructure
level,
capacity assessment. Yeah.
there is still a level of capacity over and above our operative district plan baseline that is being enabled.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you, Keith. Cool. That was very clear. Thank you. Another question I had was just looking at I was really interested in some of the feedback that we got from some of those key stakeholders, and it's not totally clear what feedback is from who, although you could kind of guess to some extent. One of the pieces of feedback was around having a greater capacity for that commercial residential mix, and I'd have to go back to the exact wording, but to what extent have we taken that into account? So that's for our centres.
Yeah, I can speak to that briefly. So effectively, the IPI focuses on the IPI, what we're doing through Plan Change 12 is a residential plan change first and foremost. So we're not proposing to change our business centres hierarchy. Our business centres, through again that housing and business assessment currently, which was only approved and accepted by MFE last year, shows that we've got sufficient business land as well. What we have done is enabled more residential living above the ground floor in our business centres. That already exists in the central city, has done for several years, and it actually exists in some of our other centres. So we've kind of lifted the building heights up, commensurate with that walkable catchment around the central city. So we enable that mix, I think, is what you're referring, and we certainly enable that in the central city zone in our northern and southern precincts.
I've just found it's page 32 and paragraph 125F. additional objectives, policies and rules that will enable more expansion of existing commercial and mixed uses in neighbourhoods where densification will occur. And I guess reading that they may be referring to some of our suburban centres, you know, you've got your retail and your kind of neighbourhood shops and amenities and things, and it seems like they're asking for maybe an expansion of the area where you can have that retail and, you know, other business activities, which may allow, and then, you know, residential on top, which sounds great, but, you know, that would allow for potentially a dampener on rents and things for those businesses there, and a greater capacity to serve those intensifying communities.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point. So there have been submissions, and I think it may be from Kaingaroa around enabling more expansion of existing centres. I think the last district plan was very careful not to make some of those suburban and neighbourhood centres unnecessarily large, when we've already seen a lot of these centres have got a lot of vacancies and they're not at their maximum capacity. So there's a lot of underperforming centres out there in the neighbourhood and suburban centre market. So the HBAs that we've done so far is not showing currently that those centres need to be expanded. That's not to say in the fullness of time, when neighbourhoods become more intense and there's a bigger catchment and a retail spend within their locality, you wouldn't revisit that. So under our housing and business assessment requirements, we have to look at every 3 years how our centres are performing, and they are taking into account the land use zoning and the catchments that may or may not have changed over time. But certainly since the last district plan was made operative in 2017, most centres have still got sufficient capacity for their purposes. So there's been no desire to increase the commercial footprint of our existing centres in the city, and certainly not through the intensification planning instrument. I'm not saying we wouldn't revisit that, of course. It's good practice to look at those centres as we go forward, but there's still a lot of capacity in our central city and a lot of our suburban centres.
Okay. I guess I won't dig into it deeper now, but I would be keen to, and it's good that we review it every 3 years, but I've had, some feedback around that, and I think it's actually worth, you know, looking at it in some different ways. Okay, but I'll go back to last questions. In terms of the water connection policy, my question is, how do we ensure that this is only a backstop? Because I see that there's a risk that we tell people, okay, we're not going to stop you from developing because of a lack of capacity in our strategic infrastructure in stage 1, but we also have this water connections policy which could then trip you up if you, you know, and so how do we ensure that that is only a backstop, like a very last resort, and it's not used as a planning tool to dampen development while we, you know, delay investing in infrastructure, for example?
So the intention is, and I might look to Jackie Collier to actually answer this, but just as a starter, it's to ensure that we're not overloading those networks through to greater intensification. But Jackie, do you want to answer that?
I think the reality is that it will probably end up being a backstop, even in the stage 1 areas, until we've got enough certainty that there is investment secured for the infrastructure that's needed to service those areas. We're still working through the specific criteria and the thresholds that will apply to the connections approval process, and the interface that's needed for developers and the public. So our team's really working hard on that at the moment. The infrastructure capacity assessment that's included in Plan Change 12 and the connections policy approval process, we're really aiming to get sort of clear alignment between the types of the things that will be looked at as part of both processes, so that we're not, requiring customers to do very similar things that aren't quite the same, and try and avoid duplication where we can.
Can I just add to that? The point about the infrastructure capacity assessments is that they will give the developer...
Lachlan, just grab a mic if you could, just for the Zoomers.
The requirement to produce an infrastructure capacity assessment will give the developer an early heads up that there is a capacity issue in the network at the consenting stage. So we won't, that will help, I think, to avoid the kind of scenario that you've identified, which is one where they sail merrily through a consenting regime and have a resource consent in their back pocket enabling development, and then they come for a connection and engage with the connections policy, and for the first time realise there's a problem with capacity. So that should actually happen. Those signals that there's capacity issues in the network should happen at an earlier stage.
I mean, is it something that you could basically work through in a due diligence stage of looking at a development, right?
Yep. And I would expect that that should be at the forefront. I think in any kind of pre-application type meeting with council where the nature of the proposal engages in the capacity assessment, you'd expect that to be the first thing everyone's talking about, quite frankly.
Okay, so how long does it take to do a capacity assessment, and then just in terms of the practical, again, because at first I thought, okay, stage one, at least that's all go, but then you've still have that risk there, and my concern is that it could have a chilling effect for developers where it is providing that uncertainty. So can you give me absolute confidence that we can avoid that?
No, I think your instinct is right. I think it will have a chilling effect. But I think that what it will do is it will also then send very important signals to the market about where is the best place in the city to develop where you're not engaging with those kind of capacity problems. And that's exactly the kind of outcome that we're looking for, which is directing intensification into the stage one intensification area where there's going to be the supply of infrastructure to support development. So, if someone wants to develop outside of areas where there is network capacity, you can expect that to cause them to pause and think carefully about the location and perhaps decide to be developing intensification somewhere else.
Could we remove the hook for stage one in terms of the water connections policy so that there is absolute certainty that you're not going to be snagged with a capacity issue?
I might jump in if I can. I guess therein lies the challenge in giving effect to Te Ture Whaimana, because if we're making decisions before there's an investment and delivery plan in place to provide the infrastructure that's needed to service that development, it runs the risk of network failure. And that's really the whole basis of the approach we're taking to Plan Change 12 is really to uphold our obligations under Te Ture Whaimana. Just your question around timing. The tools that we're preparing at the moment are, I guess, akin to a triaging type arrangement where we're aiming to have like a green light sort of scenario where if a development's under a certain threshold, it's pretty easy sailing through. An amber where there might be some issues or there's potential for approval but with some conditions, and then red where it's just really, really difficult. And our intention is to develop, like these tools haven't been developed yet, but to have a public-facing system so that not just large subdivision developers but people who are wanting, to do just redevelopment of their section or apply for building consents are going through the same process. So it's flagging any potential issues to them really early.
Okay, thank you. I think early is just the main thing. Okay.
I think, Councillor Thompson, there is a piece of work which we're yet to do, which is how we raise awareness with that wider development community on how this all works, and that is something that through our various forums, develop engagement, working with the relevant professional parties, having them understand exactly what this all means. And I think the second part to this is the conversation that Jackie has referred to really heightens the focus on the next long-term plan. Now, council may or may not be in the business of providing water services, but the focus on the level of investment and where that investment is needed for Three Waters is going to be driven significantly by our HUG strategy, by the likes of this work through this district plan, which is honing in to say there is a you've heard me use this before, seismic shift in terms of the amount of investment required, but also how that investment is linked to land use and where we want that investment to best achieve those outcomes. To simply continue to allow growth everywhere with the obligations we have around Te Ture Whaimana and our Three Waters networks is going to provide the challenges that Jackie's articulated. So we are going to have a much stronger correlation between land use and infrastructure investment and where it can and can't occur. So that is going to be the big focus for either this council for the next LTP or our input into the new waters entity, and or both.
Thank you. I have one last question with your indulgence, Chair, and that's just in terms of the minimum densities. I was interested in that as well, and my question is whether we've gone far enough with those, because we don't, I guess my concern is we don't want someone to go in and maybe the economics of it doesn't stack up anyway, so you wouldn't see it anyway. I'm interested in your thoughts there. But where we're trying to really invest into infrastructure in stage one, we don't even want a duplex really. So have we gone far enough there? And have we gone far enough in terms of our suburban centres as well? Because I haven't seen any minimum requirements there. And with, a limited 400-metre radius where you really want that greater density, because that's a great walking distance to the bus or whatever, there's a risk that we lose that capacity for a long time if there's still very low density development occurring.
Sorry, got a bit frog in the throat. Sorry, Councillor Sarah. Yeah, good questions. I mean, I know effectively what you're saying is there a big enough distinction between the general residential, which is pretty pervasive, 70% across the city, and the medium density zone around our centres. Like the unfettered response through government would be not to have any density controls, but for the reasons we've just heard from Jackie, and if you apply that across the city, our response has been to, as a benchmark, look at our 200 square metre density for duplexes in the general residential, and then 150 square metre sections for our medium density zone. So we're signalling a slight shift in having smaller net site areas for our medium density zone. We also enable higher building heights in our medium density zone as well to try and encourage more apartment living and typologies. There's also slight nuances around site coverage and
but no minimum requirements for density.
No minimum requirements for density. So I mean, there's a minimum at net site area of 150. So what we're trying.
Sorry, I mean that you at least have to build, something of whatever density, rather than just redeveloping a single house with a single house or even a duplex. Correct. When you're right next to suburban centre. So would it be appropriate for us to have, what's the right term?
You can't make a particular density mandatory, but what the plan does do is obviously establishes certain activity status for the densities, and so for the densities that you don't want, they've been attributed non-complying activity status, which is apart from prohibited, it's the most sort of prescriptive, and so I think it's lawful and it's defendable at non-complying status. I think you'd really struggle to establish a rule based on a prohibited activity, because any particular, provided it was a residential activity, any residential activity in a residential zone, even if it wasn't giving you the density you wanted, I think would be hard to justify that as a prohibited activity.
Should we be making single or double dwellings and non-complying activity in our medium residential zones? There's my question.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and this is going to Mongo James's argument around single dwellings and high density, we've certainly turned the heat on high density. We're saying we don't want to see sort of those lower typology densities in our high density zone. So we're talking about making things more discretionary if they're lower density typologies, but we really haven't gone there in our medium density zone at this time. We feel that the market is still, we're still enabling townhouses and duplexes in the medium density zone. I mean, it is a big discussion whether it's a challenge that exists now. The market will deliver a certain typology like duplexes right now, and the risk is that they will build a single-story duplex exactly where you'd like to see a higher density form next to a suburban centre. But those levers we put in place are signalling that in terms of building height and sort of the more permissive
Sorry to
site
interrupt.
coverage,
Yeah,
you know.
in answer to Sarah's question, it's no.
Yeah.
But is that an action that you'd want to potentially pick up?
I would be really interested in having just, maybe we can take it offline, or if there's an action or a motion, but I would be really interested in having an option come back for the 18th. That would be excellent.
Yeah, okay, we can do that, because it's just a bit beyond the scope of today's.
Yeah, we can look at that.
Is that all right?
Yes.
Cool. Is that all your questions?
Yeah, we'll have a break, right? And I can work out exactly the logistics of...
Kind of keen to move this, actually. But I'll come back to you. So I'm going to move it. Councillor Angela's going to second it. I just had a question coming out of you. I know Angela's got another question. I'll come back to you, Sarah, if you want a bit of a moment. Just in page 22, in that box, it talks about council cannot refuse an application if there is insufficient strategic network capacity. So that goes against a little bit what Jackie said. So if someone's in stage one, unless I've misread it, if someone is in stage one, we cannot refuse them an application. Is that?
Yeah, so I think the distinction here is that there is the district plan, and there's a bunch of objectives and policies and rule frameworks that we're talking about here. That sits in a box. Then we have what Jackie's talking about, which is part of that broader connections review, which sits in another box. And we'll set a policy framework within the district plan, which is more enabling within that stage one area, which is exactly what you're reading. But, as we've talked about, there is a backstop in terms of overloading the network, which is where the connections policy process kicks in.
Okay, so that cannot refuse an application does not apply to the connections policy.
We are talking about the district plan, yeah, so they're two distinct things. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to go to Councillor Angela's got a question, and I'll come back to you, Sarah.
Thanks, Chair. Mark, my question is very, very simple but important. Just wanting to understand of the communication to 50,000 residents, when that's going out and what we're going to be saying.
Yes, so there's a number of statutory required sort of comms that go out in that package. It's made up of about 4 different parts. The intention is, subject to resolution to this council, that it will be mailed out on the 19th of August. But possibly Lachlan can talk about what statutorily we're required to include in that notification package.
Yeah, thank you. The first thing is to note that the RMA is a little draconian in the sense that it still expects letters to be sent to affected landowners, so we haven't yet quite moved away from hard copies, unfortunately, when it comes to notification of plan changes of this nature. So there is a sort of a requirement for a letter to be circulated, which is pretty onerous. Now, some councils manage to link that letter drop in with other circulars that they might be sending, like newsletters or even rates notices, if you can get the timing to work. But in this particular situation that we're in, it's going to be separate letters. So those separate letters will go out, and they will be going out to all affected landowners, and they will include, the letter itself will be pretty straightforward, but it's going to have some enclosures. It's going to have a copy of the public notice of the plan change, and it's going to have an information sheet about the important sort of highlights of the plan change, sort of plain English information sheet, and then there's going to be another information sheet which is dedicated to the submission process and how you actually participate in the plan change hearings and so on. So all of that meets the statutory requirements, and we'll be making sure we hit those requirements.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Lachlan. Mark, I heard from Lachlan that that communication meets the statutory requirements, and that's great. We have to do that. But it sounds to me like a lot of that information will be confusing and concerning for residents. So I guess my request is twofold, and with your permission, Chair, I'd like it listed as an action in the minutes, and I have sent Mark and Blair an email just recently on this. But can we include in very, very plain English as well, you know, what this is all about, what it means, an FAQ sheet, if we're able to do that? Are we able to do that?
Yes, yes, Councillor, we can do that.
Okay.
And I might just step in there very briefly. Sorry to stop your
No, that's
train.
okay.
We will also be running some sessions, so public sessions, which we'll advertise across different parts of the city, which will be manned by a range of parts of council. And there is also what's called a Friend of Submitter service, which is funded by the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, which we'll be directing people to, and that resource is there to help people formulate their submission or guide them through that submission process. And Simone's here with me, who's leading the kind of comms and engagement, so I'm not sure if Simone, do you want to add anything?
I'm sorry.
Cozy.
Councillor O'Leary, I just wanted to reassure you that we're very aware of the need to get that letter right. Obviously, it's going out to the whole city, so we want to make sure that it's understandable. So my team's been really across the plain Englishing of that, and it's a friendly letter. All the information is plain English, and we've been circulating it internally to get lots of feedback on it, just to make sure it's kind of sitting right and that it answers those questions up front. We'll also get it across yourself and Councillor Ryan, just as Deputy Chair and Chair, to make sure you're aware of what it's looking like in the next few days. So yeah, I'm happy for that. Thanks, Simone. And can you also make sure that you send out a fact sheet and frequently asked questions to all elected members, because I know that the team will be flooded with emails and phone calls and all sorts, and you'll be busy dealing with those, but we will as well. And it's a very complex matter that affects everyone, and we need some really good, solid key messages so that we're all sort of singing from the same song sheet. So can we please make sure that happens before the 19th of August? Absolutely. Currently planning to do that immediately after the council meeting on the 18th, not wanting to preempt any decisions, but I'm happy to do that ahead of time.
Okay.
Yes.
Do you think we should have the letter a little earlier
Happy
than the 19th or the 18th?
Absolutely happy to provide that earlier. No problem.
Great. Thanks, Chair. Happy to second.
Thanks.
Well, not happy, but,
Delighted?
Delighted, no.
Mark, just a question, just working with Sarah on this non-complying to build, do you want to explain it perhaps, Sarah? I'm just wondering whether this is something we should build into today's resolution or keep separate as a staff action. So I just need you to be honest about...
Look, I'm happy for the committee to provide direction through adding to the resolutions today, if that's what the committee wants to do. Yep, I think it's a very valid point that Councillor Sarah raises in terms of minimums.
Okay, do you want to speak to...
I mean, the question is just how much work, because Chair Ryan was just concerned about adding work. Is it something that would be relatively, like, could kind of copy and paste what's currently there for high density to medium, or is that like simplifying things too much?
Yeah, without putting the team on the spot, yeah, it is a lot of work. So there's a few things we could look at, which is around the activity status of those typologies to draw even more of a distinction between what could occur in the general residential and the medium density. So make, duplexes are more of a discretionary rather than a permitted activity. So that might be an easier signal to send. Because quite, at the minute, as I said, the permitted activities are the same in the general residential zone and the medium density zone. So that's one approach we could take, which would be easier to work through than just coming up with another density requirement. Because those density requirements will likely be challenged, but one of the reasons they're in the plan is they exist at the minute. They're tried and tested and the market are delivering to those. So I don't want to just in the next 48 hours pluck another density requirement without looking at the evidence base is my technical assessment now. So we could change it. We could change something to make it more explicit around the typologies we want to see in the medium density zone.
Yeah.
But to come up with another density requirement, there'd need to be some supporting information behind that.
I just wonder, Sarah, whether we work on that over the next bit, because there's some other resolutions today that we could take it on as a staff action. I'm also wondering, to your other question, in terms of plan change iterations, there's going to be more iterations coming. We've got inclusionary zoning coming in the new term and other things. Which of these things we can fold into? Is that right?
Yes, I mean, you'll hear from Mr. Hornby later on inclusionary zoning. They are kind of interrelated. So the inclusionary zoning needs to understand the planning framework, which is currently being decided now and will be tested through hearings. But inclusionary zoning needs to understand all of those things that are at play in a residential zone. So typologies, the minimum net site density areas, and also the new things that have come into play like financial contributions, because all of this has an impact on the feasibility of requiring inclusionary zoning in our infill areas. So it will not be lost, and it will be picked up in that work as well to look at that wider picture.
So you're saying, I mean, could there be a staff action that we just consider options for discouraging low density in areas where we don't want it, but if it's looking like it's going to be too much work to do, then you can let us know and it can be flagged for a next change?
Yes, no, I think based on Paul's comments, I think yes, an action would be more preferable. I think that gives us the scope to actually think about whether or not A, it's feasible in the time we have, and B, what those options are for the outcome you're seeking.
I'm happy with that.
Cool. Can I just also add that it's not just that this might be picked up in some later plan change. There's the submission process for this plan change as well. So don't forget, what we're talking about is going out and publicly notifying this iteration of PC12, and then we're going to receive public submissions on it. And there could very well be a public submission from some interested party who picks up on exactly this point and asks for it as relief. And we do expect to receive submissions from parties who actually think that the plan change doesn't go far enough in terms of driving densities. So it may be that comes out of a submission.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. Okay, it's been moved and seconded. If there's no more questions, we'll go into debate. I do understand there's morning tea today, which is awesome, so I'll just put that out there. Does anyone want to kick off? If none, we'll be going to the vote.
I know. Hang on, just before you said something there, sir.
Okay, Councillor Martin, then Mangai James.
Rob can have right of reply. And
that was too quick.
Look, notwithstanding my questions before, which probably sounded glass half empty, because I think we do have some significant issues where, while the Parliament is well intended in terms of the housing crisis facing this country, the one size fits all obviously is not, in my view, appropriate. And in terms of the split between central government and local democracy, the core bit of local government, in my view, is the total of creating a good urban environment. And years ago, I was in a North British town, and I think I was an MP at the time, talked to the economic development people, and their program of encouraging investment in this Yorkshire town. And the guy said in his Yorkshire accent, and forgive the more perhaps sexist overtones, he said, you can print all the pretty brochures you like, but if wife thinks it's a dump, they're not going to come. And, you know, obviously I would now, if family or partner thinks it's a dump, they won't come. But the very clear message is there. You can do all the glossy stuff, but if there's a perception over time that Hamilton's not an attractive place to live, work, play, then they're going to look to Tauranga, they're going to look at other places. They'll even probably look to some of your so-called satellite towns, you know, the Cambridges of this world, the Tiamutus, to say, actually, no, Cambridge with all its green space and sort of bungalows is a more appealing place. So I think I actually do admire the incredible work that has been done on this program, and I do see and respect the intellectual and professional capacity. I have sat with Pippa Mahood and others before through previous district plan processes, and we've had the best will in the world, hand on heart, but as you know, planning in this nation still, and design and architecture in New Zealand, I mean, you come to New Zealand for landscapes, not for architecture, but what I'm trying to say is your intent is the best, but sometimes the outcome is, you know, unpredictable. And, you know, you walk around Cameron Road and parts of Hillcrest and other places with cars on the road, and where neighbourhoods have been transformed, in my view, in a negative way. But getting it right, you can still have good, intensive, high-density urban environments if you get it right. And I'm hoping that this plan, Mr Chair, notwithstanding the constraints of the Parliament, will actually lead us there. But as we would say, the devil will be in the detail. But again, all I want to say is thank you to our staff and you and the collective team. And I hope, hand on heart, I don't have need to reflect on what the guy in North Yorkshire told me. In fact, that, you know, we don't want Hamilton as a dump. We want Hamilton to be an incredibly beautiful, vibrant urban cities that I do associate with some cities around New Zealand, also overseas. So that's our challenge. And for those on the new council, good luck.
Thanks, Councillor Martin. Are you still keen to go next?
I am, and I'm back on board. Cool. Thank you, Mr Chair. I guess as a starting point from where I wish to make comment is, like, by all means, my inquiry of the team could have been delivered better, but I guess I do really respect the work that's been done to date, and especially under the pressures and timing of everything to get to this point. So I do respect the amount of work. I guess if I can start from a point around where I apologise to you, Mr Chair, and to the committee, I should have declared my interest in Te Ture Whaimano o Te Awa Waikato, because I guess although I wasn't part of its genesis, I was there when it was enabled 2010. And I guess since then, and I do see two in the room who were there at 2010, that my interest in seeing an application of a holistic ideals around how we manage our waters and how we look at the waters as a catchment and our relationships to it, and that it's not just ecological, but there's also a human fabric that sits within Te Ture Whaimana o Te Awa Waikato. And I guess my inquiry, and like we're 12 years down the road now, and the importance of getting into the details around how it's implemented is important to me, hence where my line of work has been for the last 12 years. So I guess when I look at where we are right now, and I don't say this to disrespect anybody around, that it's just about the betterment of the water, it is, but it's more than that. There's so much more that fits within that fabric. And there is a tungi that sits within the birth of Te Ture Whaimana around recognising the korowai, the threads that sits together around what that cloak sits over our waters. And so I guess my suggestion or thoughts in this space is around, can we just be truthful around what we're giving effect to when we say giving effect to Te Ture Whaimana o Te Awa Waikato? There is lots to within that in terms of objectives and strategies, and that's reflective of the many that came and built what we have in front of us. And so in my view, when we rallied earlier this year to get other organisations to support us towards getting this as a qualifying matter, there was perspectives beyond just seeing it as a betterment of the waters, betterment of the environmental values. The buy-in was, it's a holistic document that sits there for all, and that includes those who bring a te ao Māori perspective, a mātauranga perspective, a cultural context that's often missed in the application of rules. So I guess that's where I wish to leave it, Mr. Chair, and the committee. I think if we just, as we notify this, I think within the communications, just saying what we are giving effect to in Te Ture Whaimana would probably sit better with most, who are our partners that helped us champion it down to Wellington around what Te Ture Whaimana as a qualifying matter should look like. Kia ora.
Thank you. Councillor Rob.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Look, I also, and I know this was done earlier in the meeting, but want to pass my thanks on to the staff and their supporters and colleagues for the work that's been done thus far. Gives me great comfort with people like Paul and Mark, and the fact that it also appears to be across the organisation, with Jackie being involved in the waters or in the engineering space. So I'm pleased that we're trying to develop a plan which is across the organisation rather than siloed, as many things are that happen in bureaucracies. The full implementation of a district plan like this will probably stretch over 3 trienniums. But what concerns me more is that the outcomes from this district plan, good and bad, will be very visible in this city in 50 years' time. So the bad aspects will still be around, and the dump that that Martin talked about will come back to haunt us. I don't think, and this is one of the problems of a plan that's being driven by a centralist approach. I don't think squeezing more living space onto less land will, from an economic perspective, result in us achieving the housing affordability that this government and this council are setting out to achieve. And that concerns me. So we've got the economic aspects of that being driven, and also the choice aspect. And Martin mentioned that in his debate about people who do want to live in a bungalow, who do want a little bit of land around their section, do want a reasonable sized road outside so that visitors can actually park in the street. And so those people, those residents will be driven to some of our smaller towns, and where they will have that lifestyle guaranteed, possibly at a lower cost, and will also then create transport issues as they come into the city every day to learn or to work. So I'm quite worried about if we don't do what we need to do, then we will end up with an outcome that doesn't achieve what we need to do. And one last comment: the letter to 50,000 people, that sends a shiver down my spine, because I know what happened when we sent 50,000, what was probably 48,000 letters out 10 or so years ago. Please make sure that we all have some oversight on that. Please make sure that the letter sets out what is negotiable for us in this district plan and what is not negotiable, because I think that that's what will, that's how the residents will come back to us with their queries. So I think the letter that goes out needs to be clear, and we need, as an elected member group, to have some oversight on that letter. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob. Mayor Paula.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think Rob's spoken about a lot of the issues that give me some concern. World is, for our Hamiltonians, the world is changing quite a lot. The face of our city is going to look quite different in a very short period of time. I think he's absolutely right. We need to distinguish between the requirements of government and the ways in which we're trying to keep some quality control over the development, because I think that's critical. the timing sucks really in terms of people are already quite anxious and upset about a whole raft of issues out there in the community, and this will be just another concern and worry because not everybody understands the detail. Sorry, I just get rid of that. The phone came over my iPad. Not everyone understands the detail like we do, so it needs to be in plain language. Absolutely support Councillor O'Leary's idea that we need a no-nonsense fact sheet that people can go to. That's worked very well for us in the past, and I think that's pretty imperative. Speaking about the development, I want to thank staff for all the work you've done. You were given a curveball by government. We were already underway with strategic planning based on the direction of future-proof, the Metro Spatial Plan, and we were thinking about how to make a denser city in the right way. And then in came this curveball from central government, and you had to adjust. And Ryan, you had to pivot, didn't you? You had to pivot and do some things differently and think differently. And so I applaud you for the way that you've been able to do this. Just in terms of, I don't think it's a conflict of interest, but the same as James, I should acknowledge that I on the WRA work with the Te Ture Whaimana, which of course is under review, but I don't think that prevents me from having a say on this item today. If I'm wrong, please sing out. The other thing is just going back to that whole quality city. This is pretty critical because we need to build a strong future, a much better future. And it is about enabling those strong neighbourhoods and also being able, not just infrastructure, but the social infrastructure too, and how we build nicer places to live for Hamilton. We need houses, we absolutely need houses, and we need development to go on. I'm not convinced that this direction from government is right for us. We've said that, and we can continue to say that to government. But the best we can do is to plan against any adverse effects. And I think it'll be interesting to see what the feedback is, because through the hearings you'll hear from the general public about what they think, but you'll also hear from various levels of expertise within the development community. So thanks, Ryan, Angela, and all the others on this team for the work, and staff for the work you've done.
Thanks, Mayor Paula. Councillor Sierra.
Thank you, and I also echo the thanks to you, Chair Ryan, for the work that you've done and your excellent chair reports, and also to all of the work of all of the staff who have been involved in this to date. It's been a massive undertaking, there's no doubt about that. Hamilton is growing up. We simply cannot keep doing what we've been doing going forward. That's the reality of becoming a bigger, growing city. We have to build in a more dense way, but we have to also ensure good quality of life for people living in those areas, so that investment from us in streetscapes, in green spaces, in playgrounds and all those things are going to become more critical going forward. Yes, there are trade-offs with greater density, smaller backyards, but there's also benefits. People can live closer to the things that they need on a daily basis, closer to work, closer to the shops, closer to the park, to school. And we also have to remember that affordability is critical here. We face a lot of crises at the moment, but housing affordability is still one of them. And so it's really important that we're providing for more capacity for housing and in the right places. So I'm encouraged that despite our qualifying matters putting a bit of a dampener on capacity, that we are still significantly increasing our housing capacity from where it is currently in the district plan. It's also critical that we're building up in the right places. We want lots of people living close to suburban centres, close to employment and really frequent public transport. And we also don't want to lose the opportunity to get that right, which is where I think it's important to discourage low density in the areas where they are prime locations for greater density and for really getting that quality urban living that we're looking for. Overall, I think despite the challenges, we're getting a pretty good balance between housing and environment. I think I'm really excited by the requirement to have trees on our new developments. We're losing canopy cover in our city, and it's only going to be more important with climate change and it getting hotter, and also to support our nature in the city strategy. And we're introducing water efficiency requirements, which again will become more and more important. And financial contributions for things like street trees, street amenity, and investing in nature in the city, again, so important for livability. So I'm really happy with a lot of the outcomes in this. I am concerned about the water connections policy. The last thing that I'd want is to see a chilling effect in stage one, where we want that's where we absolutely want development to occur, and we want to encourage it as much as possible. And I think what's going to be absolutely critical here is leadership from this council to make sure the infrastructure goes in to support development as soon as possible to make sure that housing can go ahead. Thanks.
Yeah, well said. Thank you. Good comments from everyone. Just to sort of round out this concept of eco-density, which I think Mark coined, is I think is really fitting for this time and for the city. And as Sarah touched on, quite a few things that we're introducing to mitigate some of this unfettered effect in the wider suburbia, with financial contributions, infrastructure assessment, permeability, trees, rainwater tanks, landscaping, minimum lot sizes. I think we've done everything within our envelope to try and provide good outcomes for those that build outside of stage one, and really promote stage one as a vibrant CBD, which this council's been trying to work on for the last 15 years. So I think the outcome's really good. 75% of our workforce has access to CBD or that northern corridor, and really good high public transport. So it makes sense on a whole lot of levels. So thank you for your support and endorsement of this today. We'll now release it and we'll go to the vote. So those in favour? Any against? None. Carried unanimously. Thank you. We'll break to 15 minutes, and we'll come back for the General Manager's report. I've lost my 90 minutes, but it was aspirational. We're going to kick off with item 8, General Manager's Report. Thanks, Blair.
Thank you, Chair. Just the GM report today is a broad summary of a range of planning matters that the team are working in addition to Plan Change 9 and Plan Change 12 we've just heard about. So rather than go through the report in detail, I'll just summarise the major items that are covered and the decisions being sought, and then open it up for questions. So the first of those are there are 2 plan changes that council staff are working with the development committee on, and we anticipate receiving those sometime in the next 2 to 3 months. They are for Ruakura, the tramway block plan change, and that has been previously reported to this committee. In addition to that, a plan change in relation to some land around the periphery of the Te Rapa Racecourse. So this report notes that recommends commissioners be appointed for both the plan changes, and they are as listed in the report, which include Councillor Donovan for one and Councillor Wilson for the other. The report also notes that those plan changes will be received and processed under the delegation of the Chief Executive and myself, noting that there will obviously through the RMA processes be full opportunity for Council to participate in those processes. Secondly, the report canvasses an additional work stream, which is Plan Change 14, Flood Hazard Plan. This is a new piece of work in relation to, as the name suggests, flood hazards across the city and how that fits into our district plan. The intention for that piece of work is that that has progressed and that plan change is notified before decisions on Plan Change 12 are publicly notified. So that's sometime mid next year. And in addition to that, the report also just outlines discussions that staff are having with Kāinga Ora on the exploration of what's called a specified development proposal, which is a new power in the Urban Development Act, effectively an urban development authority for 2 areas of the city, potentially the central city and also potentially across the Fairfield-Enderley partnership. So very early conversations, no decision required today, but obviously that's something that we'll explore with Kāinga Ora and bring back further information as that process progresses. And if there is an appropriateness for council to formally participate in that process, there'll be a decision for council at some future time. So through the chair, happy to open the report up for questions, and myself or the staff members and the attendants will answer.
Thanks, Blair. Councillor Martin.
Just your recommendation for C, and I'm just not at all, and I'm happy with the reasoning behind the recommendation, but I'm just wondering why that is not in pink. Because really, I don't have an opportunity to ask questions and get clarification.
I'm happy to answer questions, Councillor.
I think I can have the conversation generally, but our process, apart from elected members, we do things in confidential so that there can be a, in this case it doesn't apply, but the normal appropriate questioning without at all damage to the individual. Should we decline your recommendation?
Noted.
Yeah. So I guess if I can, I was on the with the group with the to put together recommendation of the RMA Commissioner panel, and there's a whole list there. What sort of communication do we have with those people? Because obviously we've appointed them, but when do they hear from us to say, well, thanks very much, but at the moment, this is the lie of the land? Because I think, we've had quite a significantly large panel. I accept that in this recommendation, you've obviously identified a skill mix that it doesn't necessarily exist in terms of the micro skills that we're looking for.
So the members on that panel, as you know, is quite a large list. They've been appointed for a term, I think it is 3 years. There is no expectation that we're regularly informing them as to work or not. But I would note that there are obviously matters that through delegation of staff just appoint those members to various processes, and that's often through the planning guidance team. But there is also a high likelihood that many of those members will just be on the commissioner list but never actually receive a commission or appointment during that time. It just provides us with a broad range of skills that we may wish to apply. In this particular instance, the specialist skill sets required for the plan change in the case of tramway block Ruakura, the team felt Dr. Beattie provided that additional skill set that we were seeking that wasn't available in the list of the approved commissioners.
So you're saying that in terms of the existing commissioner base, you believe that there wasn't exactly what you were looking
That's
for
correct.
within that pool?
That's correct. And Mark may wish to add to that.
And basically, as I said, with respect, if I can, for future guidance, I think these conversations are sometimes better in pink. But I think I'm
it's certainly noted, and my mistake, Councillor. Apologies for that. But yes, as Blair's outlined, we reviewed the list, contemplated some of these private plan changes coming before us, as we did, I might add, with Plan Change 12 and Plan Change 9. And felt that the competencies required to, I guess, help ensure the best possible outcome for the city, there were some gaps, and hence these resolutions.
Yeah, I've raised it with Dr. Mark before, but I just want to suggest moving ahead, I think it would be a good protocol and etiquette with the pool, that there's some general newsletter that occasionally goes out to them to keep them briefed as to, what's happening, because obviously we want them there.
Yep.
You're correct, Mr. General Manager, that in some cases they won't have any job, any work, but it's just a matter of keeping those people in some kind of general loop, so that they're not in a situation of,
And I think through the chair, Councillor Gallagher, it's something that I wish to revisit in the next triennium, the pool of commissioners, but it's obviously not appropriate at the present time. But a lot has changed in terms of the legal landscape and the legal landscape ahead of us, and what is needed. But that's something for the new training.
And an issue I've raised, not with Dr. Mark personally, but I think it would be a really good idea through the chair of this equivalent committee in the new council, that there's some kind of 6-monthly pink page summary of just so you've got a bit of an overview who was appointed to what, so that you have obviously the actual selection must remain neutral, I think, with our staff, so you don't have a political process. But it's a good idea just to have a sense of which commissioners have been picked up and why, and that kind of thing.
Yep.
But certainly I stress there's no reflection on the recommendation, which I will fully support.
Thanks, Martin. Are you happy to move this?
Yeah, I'll move.
Received? Yep. Thank you. I note a question from Maxine. I'll second. Councillor Maxine.
Thank you. And further to Councillor Gallagher's concerns, I too was a part of the panel who diligently worked through the suggestions that were made for our commissioners, and we were very cognisant that women be on that list as well, and I just note that none of the recommended commissioners that you're suggesting in either of these plan changes are women, and your comment on that would be helpful.
Yeah, look, I think, Councillor, the names being proposed here was looking at the appropriate skill set and I guess the background. It was not, we did not seek to exclude or take a view that someone was not appropriate based on gender. It was based on the skill set and the particular characteristics of the plan change coming forward. So, and very conscious that, as you say, that the current panel has a wide diversity. That's great, and I'd also note in plan change 9 and 12, we do have some wider gender diversity in those appointments.
Thank you. I note that also. Kia ora.
Mangai, James.
Kia ora, Mr Chair, thank you. If I can, I'm similar to Councillor Gallagher and Van Houston around, I guess the first point I picked up was a process to determine that somebody outside of the general list, who's not part of the list, who didn't put any effort in, put in an application to be part of the panel, is being picked, I guess is the first part. And then when I look at the committee or the appointments, I believe the chair has the skill set, you know, being familiar with some of the Tauranga City scope, future-proof, Hamilton City nuances, and to think that, that Mr. Beattie, Dr. Beattie, adds a new dynamic to the panel. I'm familiar with Lee, his work in Auckland, does a lot of work in Auckland. And so I guess where I'm coming from is very trying to understand how somebody on the panel list does not fit the criteria you're looking for to sit on as commissioners on both these private plan changes. So that was one of my first questions, and the second one was just around if Councillor Wilson and Councillor Donovan have been accredited as hearings commissioners, in terms of their recommendation 4D, does it really matter that they may not be elected on? If they've got the accreditation to be able to sit there and uphold the code, the conduct of a hearings commissioner, how does it matter if they're re-elected or not?
Good question, Mangai, James. Through you, Mr Chair, I guess to the first part of the question, look, again, sort of I've noted already, we looked at these plan changes that are coming in, and particularly in terms of tramway, where TGH are desiring a medium density development at scale with some quite complex attributes to it, particularly in terms of urban design, led to a staff recommendation, or led to a staff view that we needed some specialist urban design commissioner expertise on the panel. That led us to review the expertise that were currently on that approved panel, and that led us to identifying that there was a bit of a gap there, which then has resulted in that recommendation. I mean, to your point in terms of the councillor commissioner appointees, I guess we're quite wary as well in terms of cost. So, I mean, and also council's desire to have elected member and approved commissioners also sitting on some of these panels. So, like for Plan Change 9 and Plan Change 5, staff have chosen to put forward, based on council's desire, a council commissioner. I mean, I think that is good practice in terms of having that conduit with council, but also having that skill set, and we've done the same here in terms of providing for that. I'm not sure if that's answering your question.
I think if I just might add to that, it's just a note, Mangai, so James, so it's not saying that they aren't appropriate, it just provides a note to say that subject to the outcome of the election, there is the ability to review that, but you're quite correct that they are both qualified commissioners and they are qualified to be part of that. It's just to note that we may just wish to revisit that if the committee wishes to revisit that, if they do wish that to be a council elected member, qualified elected member on that group. The difference being that for these two plan changes, the commissioner process will commence post the election. I guess for Plan Change 5, Plan Change 9, they've started and they have commenced already.
Okay, no further questions. Thanks, Mr Chair.
I asked the same question. It's a bit of a moot point, but back to you, Councillor Martin.
Up on that, I mean, the reality is I'm not predicting elections, I'm not predicting who's elected, but unless there's stunning stellar new candidates or any of the candidates who are offering. To the best of my knowledge, even in terms of the candidates I'm aware of, the only people with commissioner experience as elected members are Councillor Donovan and Councillor Wilson. Not actually going to go near what the outcome of the election will be, but it would be that I would have assumed the council would want a couple of a commissioner each in there that have had that elected experience, that qualified commissioners. And I'm just actually wondering if, in fact, D is even necessary. All right, and I'm quite happy to remove that, and I'm saying that very neutrally, because
Yep, I agree. You're the mover, so you can remove
I'll
it, and I'm
just take
happy to
out
support.
D.
I'm happy to support that.
and by way of explanation is we've appointed. You know, we think there should be people with experience of the elected. So I think D could come out personally. I'm happy to do that.
Look, I think I'm relaxed about that. It really just was something that we just wanted to draw it to your attention, that it is an interesting situation that we find ourselves in, that we have a great desire to appoint commissioners, including those who are from the council elected member rank, and we just have this election occurring, as I have said and Dr. Mark has said, they are both eminently qualified, and we don't wish to foresee the outcome of the election. So very relaxed if you remove that. It was a note only. So.
And I think with respect, the new council is going to be in transition, and the last thing they'll be wanting to do is go revisit, you know, a particular appointment when in fact they just get on with it. And if those people have a
the key for the team is that these are both, particularly the tramway block, they're significant plan changes in their own right. The Tarapa we feel is a what's the right word? It's a more condensed application, but the tramway block has more significance, and getting the right panel who understand, who have the history, who understand the wider matters is key.
Yep, we're all good. Okay, for Angela online, just noting that D's been removed from staff recommendation, but everything else is as per. It's been moved and seconded, so we'll go into the debate. Martin, did you have anything you wanted to say?
Yeah, no, and I think we've had a good constructive discussion. I think obviously moving forward, I think, you know, it's quite good. There are some times when would be more appropriate to have a, you know, in confidential, albeit it still goes, what you decide comes back into public. And obviously I think there's been some very valid discussion for you, which obviously no doubt you and the incoming chair of this committee would pick up. And bearing in mind this is still a recommendation to council, so it's still all in white. So obviously this is subject to the will of council, but I think on balance the staff recommendation which I've moved is a good one, and notwithstanding some of the nuances that we've discussed, and I'll be happy to so move.
Fantastic. I'm just wondering, Martin, if you'd now like a right of reply.
Well, that I think.
You're stunned. You're never stunned for words.
No. I'll tell you a laugh. I've got my spouse in my head saying, you know, shut up.
Awesome. Fantastic. We'll go to the vote. In favour? Great. None against. Carried unanimously. Thank you. We're now going to... I'll move into PX. Seconded Rob. Thank you. Just give the team a moment to switch off.